Hello and welcome to our Ask a Consultant program. I see we've got lots of folks signing in. So as they're getting started, I'll just go through a couple of notes. I'm Susie Lee. I'm the Director of Nonprofit Strategy and Engagement at Forefront. This program, Ask a Consultant, is a partnership with our friends at ACN, the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits. The series has been going on since the pandemic started. Each month we cover different topics that come to us from our consultant members as well as our nonprofit members, asking to hit on big topics in the sector and whatever our pressing needs are. So this is your opportunity, our guests, to hear from some experts in the field. Today we're talking about racial equity and social justice beyond the walls of your institution. I wanted to remind folks a couple of housekeeping notes before we dig in. Everyone is muted and off screen, but we very much welcome your questions. So feel free to either use the chat box or the Q&A. In order to find those, if you hover over the bottom center of your screen, that's where it shows up on mine anyway. You should be able to find the menu panel. Feel free to enter a question at any time. And then I also wanted to mention that many folks that registered submitted questions, so thank you so much for your thoughts in guiding the conversation. We took major themes out of those. We won't be able to answer each individual question specifically, but we're pretty confident that we'll hit most of them in the thematic conversation. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Terry, who is a consultant with Vega Partners and a founder of Sea Change and a solver of wicked problems. She will be our fearless leader in conversation today.
Thank you, Susie. Let me also add my welcome on behalf of myself and the panelists for what we know will be a riveting conversation. I want to just throw a couple questions out to kind of set the stage for what we're going to do today. We know that this is the second part of a conversation that began in August. And the questions I want to throw out are, how do we do this work better? And how do we get past performative equity and move into living it? And I think today I know today you're in for a treat. So if you do not have a pen and pencil in front of you, you need to grab one because you are going to want to take notes. 3 experts will share their insights and their experiences. And today we're joined by Kim Brown, who is a globally renowned creator and expert on human-centric and inclusive innovation frameworks, who believes that the success of our future lies in empowering humans. And Dr. Willie Clubb, who is committed to and brings permanent and revolutionary change to individuals and organizations. And Nakia J. Green, who is a hands-on change agent, who leverages her ability to catalyze people by identifying and removing barriers to operational and organizational excellence. So, to get us started, I would like the audience to hear from you all and tell your stories a little bit. I want you to answer this question. Why do you do this work? And let's start with Kim.
Thank you so much. How's my audio coming through? Good? Great. It's interesting when we were doing our pre-work and chatting through this question. I think there's a lot of different ways to answer it. The one that I'm going to share with you all today is kind of twofold. So one, as a white woman, I acknowledge that I have white body privilege. And there is the power of being a comrade, more than an ally, being a comrade in the vision to build an equitable society. And so for me, that's one, is how do I use my white body privilege to be a positive actor in this space? And I think the second is, especially over the last, I'd say March, April, May, 6 months, wherever we're at, it was an incredible eye-opening experience. I read an article that this was the world giving a giant ohm and a meditation and breath to reset. And I think for me personally, it was that. It was getting back in touch with my inner child. And the idea of, if this is all we have, am I living my life to the fullest? Am I connecting with my real humanity? And I wasn't. And so I think, being able to lean in and express that I don't have all the answers. I'm not the expert. I haven't had everyone's unique experiences. But I'm here. And we all possess an individual power and means to do good. And I think that's critical now more than ever. So that's my why. And I'm sure it evolves and develops over time. But I am honored and privileged to be asked to be on this panel. I am humbled. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Kim. Nakia, why do you do this work?
Hi, Terry. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I do this work because I was designed and created to do this work. I grew up in a household where social justice was center, and for me, diversity, equity, and inclusion work is social justice in the workplace when it's done correctly. It is social justice that shows up for folks that are often not heard and not seen. I do this work as a Black woman who is disabled and who is a Christian. And that allows me the opportunity to, whose pronouns are she, her, and hers. So that allows me to stand in the gap and be able to speak for folks that don't have an opportunity to speak, that don't have access to a table to be heard, whose opinions are not often considered. So I am a Christian woman in this work, so that I state that I'm a Christian woman in this work because the reality is our Muslim brothers and sisters have not had the best experience because of their faith tradition in this country. I stand as a person with a disability because we often leave that identity out when we do this work. And I stand as a Black woman because I was taught and created to be one.
Thank you, Nakia. Willie, why do you do this work?
Well, first let me say that I'm not in my home right now. I'm in an institution and the electricity just flickered. So if it goes out, I brought my laptop just in case. So I'll jump right back in. And second, Nakia just stole part of my answer. So I'm a little lost there. Literally, I do this work because I was created to do this work, because this is the work I do the best, because there is so much pain and suffering and sorrow in the world, and I have a gift to help heal that pain. And DEI is painful. Racism is a mental illness. Enslavement was a mental illness. That mental illness needs to be healed. And I believe that there are people born to make that healing possible. And I have those hands to help heal those things. And so when I say permanent change, I truly mean a permanent change. Often we see that individuals want to change, they think about changing, they don't know how to change, and they go back 6 months later and they have the same problem. If we come back 6 months from now and we have the same problem, we didn't do anything in the first place. So we want to create long-lasting, lifelong learning change where people can be better, do better, and see better. And as a large Black man, I have the power, both physically, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, to get that done. So that's why I do this job.
So those of you who have your pens and pencils, this is your first lesson of the day. Understand yourself in the work and know your why of the work, both as individuals and organizations. Often organizations start working before they even understand why they're trying to achieve what they're trying to achieve. So lesson number one. Now, more lessons to come. As Susie already shared, we took the over 20 questions that you gave us and created some themes. And so we thought it best and that you would get the most out of hearing from each of the experts who are going to tackle this question. And the question is, how do you design and implement an authentic diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism program? I'm going to say it again. How do you design and implement an authentic diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism program. And so since we started with Kim before, we're going to start with Nakia this time, just to mix it up a little bit.
Great question, Terry. I always begin with talking to the leaders. Talking to the leaders to get an understanding of who they are, what's important to them, the work that they do, a little bit about their history, because it informs how they engage this DEI work. I also do not move forward without hearing from the people within the organization, because there is the perspective from the leader, and then there is the perspective of the folks that actually experience the organization. Not what we want the organization to be, because that's what you hear from leaders. But what you hear from the folks on the ground is, this is what it is. And so taking an assessment of not only what they're saying, but looking at the practices. What are you doing? How are you engaging? How are you coaching? Who's getting promoted? Looking at the ins of and the outs of the practices of the organization. Then we have enough to say, all right, this is the direction that we need to go in. Absolutely not creating a blanket statement on this is how you do DEI work. It's different in terms of industry. It's different in terms of organization. It's different in terms of the leadership that each organization has. There is the internal work, and then there is the external work. And no organization can do effective external work, as we have seen since George Floyd being murdered on camera, right? We've seen a lot of statements go out. We will commit this amount of money to organizations. Still to this day, I think Chase just 2 days ago, if not yesterday, came out with a number for the amount of dollars that they're going to commit to an organization. There's external work and there's internal work, but you got to begin by talking to the leaders, talking to the folks within the organization, and assessing the practices and the policies of the organization.
Before I leave you, can you kind of explore a little bit more about the distinction between external and internal? Is there actually a distinction between internal and external work?
Oh gosh, absolutely. So we've seen in organizations like Nike, right? Nike does a very good job at statements and putting out statements, but Nike has tons of fires going on internally in terms of sexism and racism that happens in the organization ongoing. But we wouldn't know that if we looked at the beautiful ads that they have. We wouldn't know that. And so it's very, as consultants, as we're doing this work, we have to make the distinction for ourselves as we're entering into this work, because we can make all sorts of assumptions based upon the work that is external, that may be amazing, i.e. Nike. But then there is what's happening internal, which often tells a totally different story. And being able to clearly delineate the two and help the client to see the difference as well.
Thank you, Nakia. So Kim, from the human-centered, human empowerment space, how do you design authentic work?
Well, I absolutely love what Nakia just shared. And I think from my perspective, and again, I love this question and it's really big. So I will share two specific aspects that I think are critically important. One is you have to fund it. Fund it appropriately. Money drives mission. So in all of our work we've seen, and I challenge you all, and I know we're going to get a chance to get to know who's on this call more. I challenge you all to really reflect on putting money behind things that are critically important, because this space hasn't ever gotten it. And money drives mission. And when you see the investment, you see the value, especially whether it's nonprofit or for-profit or community-based culture work, you have to fund it. So don't tell me if it's important if you're not going to put money behind it. If you're paying your accountant and you're paying your HR professional and you're paying your staff, then you sure as hell should be paying the people doing this work, regardless of that's through your HR department and outside consultant. You need to put investment behind it. Otherwise, you're not really, and to Nakia's point, then you're just shouting platitudes, right? Because I can put out statements all day long, but am I putting my money where my mouth is? And I think a lot of times, and I have a lot of friends who work in the nonprofit space, the most important work tends to be the least funded. And so we need to ask and demand the funds that are appropriate. There is nothing wrong with money to drive mission. And we need to start demanding appropriate funding and compensation for the most critical work. And the second thing is it cannot be another. You know, it's not like we do business here and then we do diversity, equity, inclusion over here. I speak with a lot of executives, and especially, you know, after the execution of George Floyd and Breonna. And they said, well, we're doing a DEI workshop, so we're good. So we're going to take a staff and we're going to put them in a room, a virtual room. We're going to do an hour, 2 hours, send a couple articles, give a statement, and then it's business as usual on this other side. And everyone's wondering why it's not working, because it cannot be an other. It takes a lot of time and attention and effort to weave that fabric together. But if we're not weaving it together, then we're actually not changing anything. It is intrinsic to every single thing that we do. Because if you're not explicitly saying, and it's funny, I was actually talking with someone that does this work yesterday. We were kind of brainstorming around this idea. There is no, if everything is based in anti-racism, and if it's not explicitly being said, then the opinion is, well, then it's implicitly racist. Like there is no other, right? This how in the world are we separating this? And yet our programs and the work that we do create a separation. It's this one over here, and it's a 2-hour workshop. It's a advocacy group. It's, you know, an email, and yet it doesn't appear anywhere else in the work. And we need to own it. We need to look at it, and we need to call it by name. We need to acknowledge it, name it, and own it before we can move forward. And we need to call out that explicit and implicit exclusion of this work, because it implies innate, you know, whiteness of culture and innate racism. So just to reiterate those two, one, you have to fund it and fund it appropriately. These programs should be getting the most money, not your accountant for your taxing, not your how to upgrade your technology software systems. This, regardless of what we're, and I think we're going to talk about that today, right, Tara, like what this is, right? Because there's a lot in that this, but fund it. This should have all your money. These are your human beings. This is it. These are your employees, your leadership, and your customers. Invest in your human beings. And two, if we are looking at a whole workplace, then invest in making sure that the culture of anti-racism, the culture of true inclusion, is being woven throughout everything you do in business. And we need to call it and name when it's absent in order to start getting there. So those are my two. I don't know if there's any follow-up questions, Terry. Hopefully that was articulate and clear. And
it was articulate, clear. I wanted to say amen, but I can't. So now, Willie Cobb, is your electricity on?
It's stopped flickering, so I'm not afraid.
Okay. All right. So you're up. How do you create authentic work?
The work I do is really difficult for people. It's extremely hard because I ask for something that they don't expect. I ask for people's personal change. You cannot do DEI in your organization if you are not personally committed to it. And in order to be personally committed to it, you have to understand where you come from, what barriers you bring, what obstacles you have to jump over. And so the first thing I ask people to do is look inside themselves, their own history, their own family, their own work history, and find out where they have been an obstacle to these issues. And the second thing then I ask them to do is, are you willing to change? Are you willing to make a personal, not in the organization, not in the business side, a personal change? Because the odds are, if there's no DEI going on in your business, there's none going on in your life. And that's the biggest problem. most of us are culturally segregated, or we work on stereotypes. We work on what we believe and what we think other institutions and other people know. And so I ask the hard things. Are you first willing to look at yourself? Then we do that process, because Kim is right. If you want to do DEI in an hour and a half, I'll do it for you, but I'm going to charge you a lot of money, and then you're going to bring me back in a couple months because something went wrong. This is a lifelong adventure. And you have to be willing to check out all of those pitfalls before you fall into them. See, I love to tell people, we do this work after there's a problem. And so they're walking along, they fall in a hole. And the old joke goes, the guy is sitting in the hole, and a priest comes by and he says a prayer for him. And a doctor comes by and he gives him a prescription. But then I walk by and I jump in the hole with him. And he says, what are you doing down here? And I tell him, I've been in this hole before. I know how to get out. But you have to be willing to follow me out. And that's the problem. People want to hold on to what they believe they know is right. They truly believe their organizations are open, and they are welcoming, and they are so loving. And then when we take a microscope to them, we see the employees also have a problem with some of the things that are going on. So the first thing I do is ask them to look at their own personal, and this is the word that's key, their own personal space. Where are you with your own personal space? Who's in your space? Who do you communicate with? Who do you know? And when we figure out that personal space, then we can grow from there.
Yeah, again, still holding back on the amen. So I want to, can we linger just for a second on this workshop thing? Because as consultants, we're often asked to do workshops, and we do workshops because we realize it's part of the process. How are you messaging to people that it is only a part of the process? How do we get people to understand that if workshops have a place, but, so how are you messaging that? And what message would you send to the consultants on this call about when you're thinking about this work and you want to do a workshop X? So what's next on that? So Kim, you teed up the workshop thing. How do we get people to understand the depth of the work and the workshop?
The answer that I have today, right? Because I think when we answer that, we get a massive leap forward in this game, is twofold. So one, executives have to do it first. And I am exasperated and exhausted. And again, I acknowledge my white body privilege. And so if I can't even imagine how anyone else is feeling when you are brought into an organization, and whether it's technology transformation or DEI or anti-racism, they don't show up. They say, oh, you do it for the staff, I'm good, or I'll sit back here. And so moving forward, I'm not doing anything until the executives do it and they're totally bought in and they do the work first. And they can own it for a variety of reasons. Call it optics. I don't really care, but you're going to do it first, because if you don't get it, and the idea is that on the other side of that in-person work, which we can call a workshop, or virtual, live in-person work, there's going to be a better understanding of the work and what really needs to be done. I think the second piece, I started exploring my journey within the practices of restorative justice, and very, new experience for me. But within Sitting in Circle, I think and having a circle keeper that has done this work in Chicagoland for almost 20 years. There was a ton of preparation. She won't sit in circle until she's spoken with each individual. And if you imagine a circle practice as a workshop, it's the idea that that's the last thing you do. Because to do that prep work and speak with each person and understand why would they show up, what's their experience, what are their concerns, what do they want to get out of it, what do they want to share, the amount of prep work that goes into that every individual, the workshop is the manifestation to start to get to those solutions. And in sitting with that practice that I literally went through just 4 days of this experience, it's the beginning of my journey, but that completely changed my perspective on how sometimes we go into a workshop without 5 months of prep. And Elizabeth does 5, 6, 9 months of prep before she'll sit in circle with individuals, because it's complex. I mean, it's really not about the solution. It's about building the human condition and the community. And that just, and I'm still sitting with that, right? That just completely changed my viewpoint of the power of a workshop. And so, yes, I think one, it's holding executives accountable the same way that it's, if you have kids, right? Do as I say, not as I do. Even kids know that's BS, but we're going to do it to other adults and not look at it and say, what the hell? So one, I think executives need to own it. And if they don't do the work, nothing's going to change. So then I'm wasting my time and I'm wasting your money. But then two, really looking at where does the workshop sit in the journey, and how do we prepare for it, and how do we reframe it into being the community building and the connecting that comes after a lot of individual prep work potentially. So that's a recent experience that I had that I'll bring out to folks on this idea of a workshop, and it completely reframes it. It's not a standalone anymore. When you reframe it as a way for community to come together, it changes our definition. And it also, and I would encourage everyone to look into restorative justice and circle practices, which are from indigenous populations. But the United States actually made it illegal until 1978 to sit in circle. And so, it's that idea of human beings sitting around a fire and building community. And how do we bring workshop back to that? Because I don't think if I use the word workshop, that would have come to my mind. And I imagine it probably didn't come to many of your minds until we had this small conversation.
Nakia, what would you add to that?
To echo Kim's point and the importance of executives being a part in setting its tone and the standard for engagement, it's important. And so as a Black woman, and the world is on fire behind me, and I'm in doing this work in DEI, I have room to push back now. So no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing I will facilitate conversations for organizations that have already been on a journey, to Kim's point. If you're on a journey and this comes up, and now we have to figure out, how do we, I want to give my people room to have these conversations. I want to introduce this topic on an organization-wide level. Yes, I will facilitate a workshop then. But now I have pushed back. It's not enough, and I'm not doing it. You want me, we talk long-term. And we have to hold organizations accountable. It's difficult as a consultant, as an entrepreneur. Every dime matters. Every touch with a client matters, but we have to push back and set the tone and set the standard for what we will not do and what we will not allow. This conversation is in trouble on a federal level. On a federal level, we cannot have these conversations around intersectionality, critical race theory, 1619. These things are being deemed as divisive. We have to take control and push back and say what we will or will not do. So I will not facilitate a conversation with you. We can talk long-term work, but I will not do that.
Willie?
So I try to help people recognize one or two small things. First, what is your economy? Now, economy, not just meaning your finances. It means where are you putting your energies? Where are you putting your efforts? What do you value most? And so when we recognize what our economy is and where we are using our economy, our personal resources, then we see what we value. And so if our economy says to us, DEI only deserves an hour, and so we're only going to allot a certain amount of our economy to that, we know that you don't value it. We know that it's not important and you're wasting my time. And so my time is important as well as your time and your organization's time. So I'm going to ask you to go back and look at your personal economy. Where do you spend your energy? Where do you spend your time, your effort, and then your finances? If this is an afterthought, that's a waste of time. So I need for you to do an evaluation of your, not just your organization's finances, your personal economy. You're going to do these 10 things. And how important are those 10 things? You got to take care of the technology. You got to take care of the other employees. So where is your energy and why is that energy important? So if we can understand both space and we can understand our personal economy, then we'll see the value in doing this long term. And if you're willing to do this long term, I'm willing to commit with you long term. That means you have my phone number. You can call me anytime, day or night, and we can discuss any issue you need to discuss. That's your economy. And so if you can really sit down and evaluate your own personal space and your own personal efforts, meaning your economy, then we can be honest, because the big problem is honesty. We don't want to be honest about how much effort we want to put in this. We want to say it'll take a few minutes, a day or two, an hour or two, and we're done. Well, that's where your economy is. That's where your efforts are going. So let's do some evaluations of your own personal economy.
So let's say an organization has done the things you just said. An organization has taken the time to understand their economies. They know their why. They've gotten the leadership engaged. They understand this is a long-term relationship. They got all that going. How do you then work with organizations to activate the people who may not be in the same place, right? If you're taking an organization, a larger organization, everybody's not going to be in the same level of understanding. Everybody will not have done the personal work that Willie has suggested is important to do. Everybody's going to be in a different place. Add to that all of our cultural definitions and our racial definitions and those of us living with disabilities and all of the things that come to work with us. How do you activate that many people to do this work? How do you deal with the predominantly white board, the predominantly white staff, or the predominantly able-bodied staff, or all of the people who represent a majority in some way who may not understand the urgency? And I use the word urgency in the sense of, as all of you have said, we are in the middle of a crisis, however you define it, whether it be the way our organizations are not functioning, whether it be the fires that are behind us federally, et cetera, et cetera. We could do that all day. But so how do you then get the rest of the organization on board, particularly if you are working alongside the person who's in charge of this effort, right? So let's start with Nakia. How do you manage all of that stuff and get this going?
I would absolutely say, I don't hear people talk about this often, but it's a sales game. It really is a sales game. You are selling this idea and notion of DEI. You are selling the hope that comes along with DEI, that this will make the organization better, right? It is absolutely a sales game. Additionally, you have to find, in that sales game arena, right? You have to find folks that will be your cheerleaders. You have to find folks that are willing to be those subject matter experts and that will go out on the limb for on behalf of the organization. While we are enacting change, we are also encouraging folks to be the rah-rah that we need in order to make this happen, because it takes convincing folks that this is the right thing to do. Everyone wants a business case for why we need to have diversity, equity, and inclusion in place within the organization. And so we are selling goodness. We are selling hope. We are selling equality. We are selling equity. We are selling inclusion. And we have to find out who in the audience, who we're talking to, what power they have, the same way we approach everything else. Who has the power, who has the influence, who on the team can make some things happen. And we have to do that work, that sales work, that guttural sales work in order to figure those things out.
Willie, how do you activate and get that institution rolling?
Dr. King was involved with an organization called the Reconciliation. And this group believed in building the beloved community. And we need to help organizations realize that their community needs to be beloved, that it needs to be the best working community possible. And they need to understand that they can only build that community that Dr. King wanted to build, that Malcolm X at the end of his life wanted to build. That can only be built through equity and diversity. And one of the things I try to help people to understand is, are you leaving things on the table? Are there other organizations or other individuals that you choose to lock out who could help build your community, help build your finances, help build your environment? And so are you so exclusive that it's harming your organization? And sometimes, and this is the really hard thing to say, if people aren't willing to look at that, is the administration, the executives, are they willing to help those people be in a better place to do that for themselves? And that's one of the things I help them to do, is they need a plan to build the beloved community in this organization. So we know the most productive, most successful organizations, whether for-profit or not-for-profit, are organizations that have a loving, compassionate community where people can go to the boss and say, I need to talk to you, where people can feel comfortable with one another. So building this comfort zone, this beloved community, person by person, is the only way to do it. People have to be willing, once again, to look inside themselves and be willing to grow with the ultimate goal of having the best community possible. That's where we want to go.
I am struck by how often the word community has come up for all of you as you're describing this work. So Kim, as we're building these communities, we often have the conversation about metrics and how do we know that this is a success and how am I going to tell that we've made some progress? And so I'm going to throw that at you first, because there are lots of questions around tools and assessments and all the things that we use to measure this work. And so how do we build community, build relationships, move past the transactions, and still somehow use the tools that have been built mostly for transactions? So, Kim, what do you think?
So this isn't your question, but I will say I think it's gotten to the point where it's a bullshit question. And I want to reframe it, or let's it's like classic, and maybe this isn't classic consult, like, well, let's question your question. I was talking with a global DEI executive at a massive global corporation, right? Phenomenal Black woman during the pandemic, and we're talking about a couple of things, and she's like, listen, we all have read the McKinsey study. All right. We all know that mathematically and financially and economically, when we are inclusive, like truly inclusive, it makes business sense, right? Like there is proven math that shows this. Smart people, McKinsey, economists, have done the work and they show that the business case is there. And I will say that every freaking CEO out there knows who McKinsey is, and they can Google the study and it shows up #1, and we've all heard that metric, right? If you haven't heard it before, you've heard it in the last 3 months. Because even the Fed has gotten on and said, like, hey, actually it's better if like everyone makes money and like does well. And it's not fixed, which means that that's not actually what it is. I think it's a bullshit cop-out that executives use to kick the can. So, and I'm like, salty, obviously. So like, bear with me. I might be being super candid with the family here. But I think it's important. Like, let's like call it, name it, own it. People are literally dying. So like, if not now, then when do we get a little spicy? So you look at that and you say that maybe it's not about the math, because the math didn't work to do it the other way. There's no standard on doing it the other way. So why are we holding ourselves? Why are we now subjected to hold it to a higher standard of metrics and measurement that we wouldn't put on anything else? We're not taking our existing corporate culture and holding it to that standard. So why would we do it for change? Because it's a way to kick the can on change, right? I can waste your time all day long by making bars and analysis paralysis to over-architect something that is just innate and we should be doing it, but it makes me uncomfortable. And when we think about corporate efficiency, right? Companies do inefficient things all the time. Nonprofits, for-profits, we all look at bureaucracy. You could look at your community organization down the street and be like, wow, there's a lot of inefficiencies in there. So it's not just the metrics and what makes sense. Is the job getting done? Is it my key stakeholder getting what they want? And it is following the path of money, right? The reality is it's shareholders over stakeholders still. And so I think there's 2 parts to that question. So one is I'm going to call it out and say it's a bullshit question, and I encourage you all. And I would actually say as a white person, you have that privilege to call bullshit more than someone else, right? As a woman, it is harder for me to call bullshit on sexism than if I brought in a male ally comrade and he did it, right? Because I own it, that person doesn't. So it's a different dynamic. So as a white individual, I have white body privilege literally because of the melatonin in my skin to call bullshit on something better than Nikki or Willie could. And so one, looking at an executive and say, I appreciate it, but you're asking the wrong question. And then I think in addition to that, then, because it actually does make business sense, I think I encourage people, and I agree with Willie, it's a grassroots movement. We need to vote with our dollars. So how do we then find measurement of how many employees, confidentially are looking at other companies that you're going to leave? How many of your competition have you missed because you didn't go to market totally inclusive, whether it's through products for individuals of color or your hiring practices, that you've actually lost business? And I'll take it another step forward. And this is why apps, and I was a trained journalist, and so I'm all about this. How would it look if your shareholders found out that you were actually cutting their potential for margin because it wasn't convenient for you to take that extra step? It's great when, activist hackers can come out, and actually did this work with some attorneys general in the United States. Are you next? Because there's a lot of people that could access a lot of information, and it would look pretty bad if it came out that you were actually choosing not to do something because it was inconvenient. And that's not a threat, that's a fact. So I think to your point, yes, we should hold accountability and metrics. No, if you want me to run through step 1 and look at every inefficiency in your organization, I would be happy to. I would love for you to give me, you know what? Let's show that math. Give me all your finances. Show me where the money is and what you're spending money on. And I can 100% bet you, I will guarantee you that I can beat that number, save you money, and increase your output, your human potential, and your worth in the marketplace. 100%, because you are wasting money every day. So I think that's also why it's a bullshit question, because it's like, all right, let's do the work. You know, are you gonna show me everything? Because I can bet you money that your ROI, $500,000, $1 million executive is not contributing to this organization as much. So maybe we adjust that.
So Kim has rightfully called out the question about metrics and assessments, and are we asking the right question? We'll wait. We'll hold up on that. We'll give you a grade later. So I want Willie and Nakia to weigh in on this as too. Well, so this whole notion of where's the line between measuring inefficiencies, as Kim highlighted, or even making or having an understanding of whether or not you're meeting your client's needs or your stakeholders' needs, or are you doing what you're supposed to do? And the line that she just articulated about you're doing this because you really don't want to do the work and you're kicking the can. So where is that? What is that?
Well, I think that's a really important point here. The problem is people don't want to look at, it's about value, what you value. So often people kick the can down the road, or it's a BS question because they don't value it to begin with. So it's one that they can easily push down the road. So, and also it happens because there's nobody in the organization putting pressure on anybody to do anything about this. It's just not valued within the organization. That's when it goes back to, once again, there are individuals in the organization who really resent doing this work. And they think it takes away from what we should really be doing. And so you're wasting our money with this, you're wasting our time, or you're wasting our effort. Somebody asked a question, I would like to answer that with this. So then what happens also if they decide to spend some resources on this? Because I agree with Kim as well, I guarantee you, you're losing money where you think you're wasting money. I promise you that. And what happens then is, if you bring in someone to do this work, you spend the financial economy, your resources to it, people resent it. There are people who literally walk out of these meetings and they resent being there, they resent doing it. And the person who did the work was terrible. The person who did the work didn't know what they were doing. They went out and they found somebody who's not a professional, somebody's cousin or somebody's uncle, or somebody who thinks they know what they're doing. And now we have a bigger problem. They have done the work, or they believe they've done the work. They think now they wasted their money. And you have people who walk out who are resentful of it. So now we have several problems here that we have to go in and fix. And that's where I want to disagree with Kim a little bit on one issue. I'm past the point where privilege has an impact on me. I am able to stand up and say, it doesn't matter because I'm a big black guy and you might listen to the white person a little bit more. You're going to listen to me because I got something to say here. And I'm able to say to them, your organization is actually losing more money. So when you bring in someone who doesn't know what they're doing, you cannot be afraid. I don't care what race, creed, or color you are. If you've recognized that this impacts the bottom line, you cannot be afraid to say, we need to do it again. It didn't work. We need to do it again. That happens all over the organization. It happens with technology. I worked with an organization that lost $20 million in poor technology. Did they give up and throw the organization away? No, they went out and spent more money to fix the technology. So you have to be willing. I don't care. Here is where we learn from old black people that black people have to work harder and be smarter and better just to be equal. And I say that's where we also have to be stronger and say, this isn't working, and I'm gonna risk my job for this. That you brought in somebody who was terrible, particularly, this has happened to me when I'm in the organization. I literally have to say to them, I teach at the University of Chicago, I have done this work. You brought in this fool, you wasted your money, and now you want to say, we tried that, it didn't work. That's just stupid. You got to be willing to say to them, we're going to do it again.
Nakia.
I first of all, kudos to my partners in crime here for everything that they just said, and I would like to add that to Dr. Cobb's point, it is ebbs. There are ebbs and flows in this work, ebbs and flows, and it could be one statement, one written word that can throw everything off the track, that can derail all of the work. And I would also like to add that, you know, I talk a lot about sales because it developed me in my younger years. So I'm a sales girl first. And when we talk about metrics, they're important. We got to be able to gauge our work. We have to be able to measure, but it's what we are measuring. Right? And so if we could flip this thing back on its head as the way, I don't use anybody else's KPI system. I develop them as I go along with the client. But we have to measure behaviors within the organization. It's the behaviors that get us these things. And so we can aim for 45% diverse whatever candidate pool or management team, but what are the behaviors by the individuals in the organization that constitute these numbers? And so the accountability, not holding all of these things on our shoulders as consultants, but ensuring that the organizations are being held accountable throughout this process, and that we are pushing back throughout this process and giving the onus to them. We are a pair of helping hands in the consultative practice, a pair of helping hands, and the ownership belongs and should stay with the organization.
So we are rapidly coming to the end of our time together, and we could do this all day, all day, all day. So the last question that I want to throw out to you as a group is the question about the one next step. All of us know that the consultant, whenever we're sitting in a room with people, where do I start? This is so overwhelming. What should I do first? So I want each of you to take on one thing you want to tell the audience or the client or the company or the nonprofit. Where do they start? What's the one thing you want them to do? And let's start with Willie.
Breathe. Stop, slow down, and breathe. Take a deep breath, relax, believe in yourself. You have an organization for a reason. You can do this. The first thing you have to do is not rush into the breach. There's a breach there. It's probably been there for a long time. Breathe. Then we can go back and talk about how you fix it. So just simply relax. Most organizations run into trouble when they think they have to solve a 400-year problem within the next 2 weeks. So I really encourage you to take your time, breathe, know that you can do this. That's got to be your very first step. If you just run out there without doing your research, you're going to get into trouble. So relax. You have resources now. We can help you get this fixed.
Kim.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Willie. Mine is, Terry, I'm gonna recommend this movie. So I was thinking about, I'll give you guys a little context before this recommendation so it doesn't seem off the wall and then you shut down. So I was thinking about how to explain to people, you can call it an awakening, you can call it just becoming aware and being a learning adult. I had mine a few years ago when I realized very academically and factually the extent of how the system's not broken. It's built exactly the way it was supposed to. This is exactly how the system was built. It is explicitly racist, documented, legal, like that shit's out there. And so I think for me, when you start seeing that, you're like, oh, you start looking through a different lens. And so my next step, I encourage you all to watch the first Matrix. And when you're watching it, don't watch it through the lens of technology taking over humans. Put that in the back of your head. There's a point in the beginning of the movie, and actually I started rewatching it after our conversation, in prep for this, to kind of get that point where so when Morpheus connects with Neo and they're sitting down in this old rundown building and they're talking, and it's right before he says, take the blue pill or the red pill. But they talk about how your eyes are going to be open. If you want to know, you can know, but you're never going to look at the world the same way again. So I would actually say, watch the movie Matrix, at least the first half of it, and think about it from the lens of true explicit racism and racial inequality in our country. And then that is the awakening. And I will actually extend that back to my co-panelists to say, you don't need to ask why. Open your eyes and do your homework, and you'll see the way the system is set up. And it is eye-opening, and it's actually right there if you know how to look for it. And so my next step is, I'm not going to tell you to read a book, although there's phenomenal books you can read. And if you're on TikTok and you search for white privilege and Black Lives Matter, there's phenomenal 30-second videos that just succinctly show in such a beautiful way the power of what's going on. But before you can even do that, I would say watch The Matrix, but think about it in the lens of racial equity and the idea that the system was built intentionally for this to be working. This is working. This is what working looks like. And this is why we need to see it for what it is, name it, own it, and then figure out how to build a system that we want that's going to work for everybody. Because the system was not built for everybody, and it was done so very explicitly. So your homework is to watch The Matrix.
Nikia.
Wonderfully said, Kim and Willie. I would like to add that we, as consultants, expand our purview of what DEI work is, because we typically sit right in terms of race, gender, and sexual orientation or identity, and it stops there. But what does it mean to be a gay Black man in the workplace? What does it mean to be a Latino who is disabled in the workplace? And so really unpacking the identities, really doing some work in terms of understanding intersectionality and its impact. And take all of that and all of those that you love and admire into your work, because it's personal. It's personal for the individual, it's personal for the organization, and it's personal for you.
Thank you. I am breathless and inspired, and I hope that all of you who've joined us are the same. I hope you took lots and lots of notes, and I hope you got the contact information for these brilliant human beings who have been with us this afternoon. Thank you.
I'd like to add my thanks to Terry and Nikia and Kim and Willie. You're all fantastic, and we were privileged to have you guide us in this conversation, so thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today for making an investment of your time in this conversation. And I also want to say, I hope you found this informative and helpful as you are on your journey. I also want to say, during this pandemic, I hope you felt a little bit less alone today and you felt like you were part of this community in this work. So with that, I will say our next program for Ask a Consultant is on November 10th. We hope to see you there and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.